Good morning. Today we're going to talk about something I find to be pretty cool. We're going to talk about conflict. But, once we talk about conflict, we'll also talk about how to solve that conflict and make peace. Okay? So we'll start with conflict a little bit. And we'll start with the idea of traps. Some of these traps are affect an individual and only an individual. And some of these are socially related. So we're gonna move into these traps to give yourself a perspective and go from there. So we'll talk about traps and counter traps. Traps are like sins of commission. That is, we take a harmful course of action. A counter trap is in some ways the opposite of sin of commission. We fail to take potentially beneficial behaviors. Okay? So in time delay traps, which is really the self-control trap, by the way, what happens is momentary gratification is in conflict with the long-term best interests. So in a time delay trap, we choose something that at the moment is pleasant, even though later on it's going to be bad for us, right? And clearly we choose smoking, dessert, whatever it might be. The counter trap, time delay counter trap, would be the notion that we avoid doing things that are unpleasant, even though they would help us in the long run, like exercising or homework. Okay, so we avoid the things that are painful at the moment. Ignorance traps. Yeah, this is cute. Negative consequences of a behavior just not understood. Okay, and so we choose to do something that's pleasant at the moment, and we don't realize that it's bad for us in the long run, or a counter trap. We avoid doing things that are unpleasant, not realizing that they are in fact better for us. And so in some of these possible traps, college students choose a major which seems fun at the moment and maybe perhaps didn't think out the long-term plans there. Or counter traps. When vaccines were first invented, and even still, people avoided them like the plague because they didn't understand the long-term beneficial consequences. Investment traps is the idea that because we have already put time or money into things, right? That we continue to. And so a time, an investment trap, throwing good money after bad, that is, maybe it's time to get rid of that old car, but you think to yourself, you know what, if I just put another $1,000 in, I can get 2 more months out of it. And it's like, yeah, that you could, but I mean, clearly the $1,000 would be far better invested into the new car rather than to bringing up the old one. Another investment counter trap would be the idea that when new versions of a computer program come out that are truly better, but what has happened, and this happened to my mother. Oh my God, bless my mother, right? But she stuck with this program called WordPerfect for years and years. WordPerfect was the program for word processing circa 1985. Well, it was actually the program until about 1997, 98. 99. I think my dissertation was written in WordPerfect, so it might have even been further. But the point is, at some point, Microsoft Word clearly dominated the market, but my mother just refused to learn because she had had so much already invested in. She refused to switch. So it was a cute, good job, Mom. She made it through everything with it. A deterioration trap. The notion that in the trap we continue to do something which at the beginning was good, but it's now no longer good. Sounds like perhaps a relationship that turns sour or something like that, or like a heroin addiction or something, where at first the heroin leads to euphoria, but then of course what happens is that you need larger and larger doses. Or there's counter trap. It's a good one. I like this. So the Dallas Cowboys were terrible for so many years that even then, starting in 2016 and 2017 and 2018, they were okay. Whatever. You feel vindicated, validated, all you Cowboys fans. But the idea is, if I was to say, hold on to my negative feelings from the past, and then say, I'm not going to bet on them, well, that's a counter trap. Okay? We fail to do something that might now be good because it had been bad. And will be again, by the way. Just a winka winka. All right. Collective traps. Now, this is where I'm really moving toward because again, this is social psychology class, and those are interesting traps and counter traps. Don't get me wrong, fascinating and cool in their own right, but it is social class. And so, in a collective trap, the pursuit of an individual self-interest results in consequences bad for the whole. So in the trap, we do things which are good for us, even though others suffer. Or in a counter trap, we fail to do things that are difficult for us, even though it's good for the collective. And so here, I love this one. Oh, this is the one that I am so glad I don't have a long commute, okay? Because this angers me to no extreme. So there's a sign which reads, left lane closed ahead, okay? You're in the left lane. What do you do? And so, of course, what happens is some people just wait as long as they possibly can. Hell, they'll drive onto the shoulder and, you know, in their own selfish interest, they saved 4 seconds, but every car, 100 cars back, lost 4 seconds. Okay, take 100 times 4 is a hell of a lot more than the 4 seconds that one driver got. Or the mattress problem. The mattress problem is this idea that you're driving along and there's a mattress in the road, and do you stop and pick it up? No, because by the time you find the mattress, you've already sat through 2 hours of delayed traffic. You know, for 2 hours you didn't know why the traffic was being backed up, and when you finally get to the spot where you see the mattress in the middle of the road, and you now know this is the reason there's a backup for 4 hours, do you stop and do the mattress? No. Okay. Counter trap. So we walk our dog, and it's in our individual best interest to just leave the shit alone, all right? Leave it alone. But if you leave enough poop in the road, it's not good for our collective well-being. But on a side note, I used to walk the dog in the park, and the dog would go over by the tree line or something, and I just left it. And I'm like, you know what? Does somebody come and pick up the squirrel shit in the park too? Probably not. So come on, it's just good fertilizer, right? But you're doing it on somebody's front lawn. I think it's probably in the collective best interest. But a counter trap, a collective counter trap, could also be something simple as, you finished, grocery shopping, and so you should return your shopping cart, but it's easier for you to just leave the shopping cart, and so you do, and then all of a sudden the consequence is not to you but to the collective other. Okay? So these counter traps and counter traps, whatever, create social dilemmas. So we got a social trap is a situation where conflicting parties, and this is key. Each person is rationally pursuing their own self-interest. And by rationally pursuing their own self-interest, you create mutual destruction. Okay? I'm being rational. That's the key. I'm a decision maker that is rationally pursuing self-interest. Nothing wrong with pursuing self-interest, right? Whoops, until it explodes. So we'll talk about two big ones, prisoner's dilemma and tragedy of the commons, and a couple of other stuff. But what happens often in social dilemmas is that, see, you gotta have a distinction in your head between a zero-sum game and a non-zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is like poker. In a game of poker, for every winner, there has to be a loser, right? The total balance at, as long as you're not playing at the casino, because then everyone loses. But, you're playing poker with your buddies at the end of the night, you count up your wins and losses, and wins must equal losses. That's a zero-sum game. But what happens in most social situations is it's non-zero sum. And so what happens is that if people cooperate and work together, often everybody can win. But if people compete with each other, often everybody can lose. Okay? So we got to keep this distinction. And often people, because they're hyper-competitive, they view non-zero-sum games as though they're zero-sum games. And the appropriate behavior in a non-zero-sum game is clearly different from the appropriate behavior in a zero-sum game. All right. Where am I at? There it is. Okay? So one of the classic social dilemmas is the prisoner's dilemma. And so what happens in a prisoner's dilemma is, here's a little matrix you see here, okay? I'll describe prisoner A, but prisoner B would have the exact same story. So, you kind of, it makes your brain hurt until you can get it in your head. But what we find is that, imagine you've got two criminals, and they've been caught Okay, they got caught in the bank vault, I don't know, whatever. But they're missing some key information to really get it worked out, okay? And so here's what they're going to do. They're going to separate the two people, the accused, and they're going to basically say this, you know what? We got all this information. We saw it. We have it on camera. We got enough information to send you to jail. All right. I mean, we got enough to send you to jail for 1 year, for sure. All right. We already have it. But here's the deal. If you just confess to this thing and you tell everything the other guy did, you walk. You're free. They go and have a problem. Okay? And so, what about if we both confess? Aha! Well, check it out. So here's the deal for prisoner A. If prisoner A confesses, okay, take a look at the left column there. Okay, if prisoner A confesses, here is the two choices: 5 years or 0 years. It depends, of course, upon what prisoner B does. Okay, so if prisoner A confesses, they get either 5 or 0. If prisoner A does not confess, go to the right column in the purple area, they get either 10 year or 1 year. Now, prisoner A is thinking to herself, because women are criminals, right? Prisoner A is thinking to herself, I don't know what prisoner B is going to do, but here's the deal. If prisoner B confesses, I get 5 if I confess, 10 if I don't. So confessing is better. If prisoner B doesn't confess, I get 0 or 1. 0 beats 1. And so prisoner A, again, acting in their own rational self-interest, says, if I confess, I get 5 versus 10 or 0 versus 1, depending, of course, what prisoner B does. Well, I'm going to choose a rational option, which always leads to less prison time. But of course, what's going to happen is prisoner B, if you flip it around, is going to be presented with the exact same thinking and thought process, and almost inevitably, they both confess and they get 5 years. If they had just both shut up, they would have gotten the bottom right box, 1 year apiece, walk in, walk out, right? So it's a powerful idea, and the problem in this game is trust or lack of trust. Okay, and the key to this game is you do not let these people talk to each other. Because if you let them talk to each other, now, who knows what's going to happen? And this lack of trust is a critical factor. So as part of my dissertation, a major part of my dissertation, I played a game. It was a game board. I've turned it into a video game subsequently. And in this game, it's a game, I'll give you a little details here. You can see a pretty crude image here in this box here. It's keys and doors. Okay, so we've got 4 doors, 4 keys, and points. And what happens is you're playing with 2 people. There's 2 people, no talking. And what happens is, imagine you're given a key. You're given a red key. And you're told, here's the deal. With this red key, you can open a red door. You see the top 2 with the R are red. The bottom 2 are green, so R's and G's. So you're given a red key. And so what happens is you can choose 3 points or 4 points. And this was actual money when I was playing this. These were nickels, and in the end, because the game was repeated over and over and over, people could be making $5 on this, $6. And this is a long time ago. So it's, it's a little bit of money. And so this person looks at it and goes 3 versus 4. So let's look at the rest of this. When you use that red key to open one of those doors, you lose your red key. But what's going to happen is that key that's showing there is going to come into play now. Okay? So if I use the red key, I open the top left door, then lose the key I just used, I get the 3 nickels, and the red key goes over to the second player. Okay? Then they play. So the second player now has a red key and looks at it, and the game resets itself, by the way. And so looks at the top of the board and goes 3 versus 4. 4 looks good to me. All right. So player 2 takes 4 and gets that green key. So now the green key goes back to player 1. Right? Player 1. And so then what player 1 does is looks at it and goes, okay, now I'm stuck on the bottom. Because I got a green key. I can only open one of the bottom 2 doors. Do I want 1 or 2? All right. And so here is the problem in this game is that anytime a player chooses in their own selfish best interest, chooses the larger amount of money, it produces the green key which is given to the other player. This is a prisoner's dilemma right here, but it's what we call the iterated prisoner's dilemma, because it's the same game where everybody acting in their own selfish best interest, and almost inevitably what happens, I mean, very often what happens is the game just devolves into the bottom right box. Okay, two, 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 two. It's like, dudes, you could have been going three, 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 three. Trust me, after 100 trials, that's a heck of a lot. It wasn't quite 100, but after a whole bunch of trials, that's a lot more money if you just pick the top left door. But see, what happens is that if you choose a red key and take the smaller amount, you have to trust that the other player is going to also sacrifice and take the smaller amount. And so when I was playing this game, actually, it was a fascinating outcome. No. Here. A fascinating outcome that I came across in this paper. Because I had people playing this game, and I mean, I did lots of versions, and I played this as a game of self-control, social, etc. But really, what happened in this thing was, at the end, I asked people a simple question. How well do you know the other person that's sitting across the table from you? And guess what? This simple, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you know them? The response to this question predicted quite well how much they were willing to sacrifice and take the red keys. Okay, we call this cooperation versus defection. But how much would they cooperate was very much a function of how much do you know the person across from you. And so I propose that this notion of trust was embedded in how well you know another person. And without trust, this game devolves into what we call defection, and people choose the green key over and over and over, and they take the larger amount and say, screw you to everybody else. So here's another social dilemma. It's just funny as heck how this works. It seems unreal. So imagine this. I've got $1. All right, no talking among the bidders again. This is key. No communication. So bids are made in 5-cent increments, and what happens is the two highest bidders must both pay what they bid. So only the dollar goes to the highest bidder, right? The dollar only goes to the highest bidder, but the top two have to pay. And so here's the game, right? At 5 cents, 10 cents, it's easy, right? The bidding makes a lot of sense. At you bid 80 cents, somebody bids 85, and you're like, I'll bid 90. I still am up a dime, right? Somebody goes 95, and you're like, okay, at least I'll bid $1, right? Now I'm even. So if I bid $1 and win, I get $1. But of course, the person that just bid 95 cents is looking at this thing going, wait a minute. I have to bid $1.05 for $1? Wait, I'm losing a nickel here. But if I don't bid $1.05, I'm losing 95 cents. Oh, better to lose a nickel than 95 cents. And so, of course, the next person goes, $1.10, I'll lose a dime. But if I don't bid $1.10, I'll lose $1. Okay? And so the game just goes just like that. All right. Now imagine doing it with a real chunk of money and see what happens. Okay. And so it's quite a powerful idea. Each individual acting in their own selfish best interest creates a situation where everybody suffers. That's what social dilemmas fundamentally are at their core. Another version of social dilemmas is the tragedy of the commons. This was originally proposed or presented or fleshed out, shall we say, by Garrett Hardin, but it really comes from much earlier work. That is, the commons actually referred to common grazing areas in medieval England. What would happen is that each village, or I don't know what you call them, a little village, would have an area of shared grazing land. And so you would bring your cattle or your sheep, most likely. You bring your sheep in, and everybody can share this common grazing ground. But what's going to happen is that, here's the deal, if there's 100 farmers in the city, in the village, right, every farmer brings in 2 sheep to graze, it's perfect, because the amount of sheep that are eating grass is exactly equal to how fast grass grows. Life is good. Okay? Now what happens is, inevitably, one of the farmers goes, okay, there's 100 farmers, 200 sheep, life is simple and good. But one of the farmers goes, my wife is nagging me, she wants to go to Disneyland. Okay, probably not Disney World or something, because, it's medieval England. But you get the idea. My wife has been bugging me, wants to go to Disney World. If I add one more sheep to that collective, to that common area, that's going to be the money I need to take her where she wants to go. And it won't make a difference, right? Because there's 200 sheep and I'm adding one sheep, 201, right? It makes a big deal in my life, all right? This is the difference between paying my mortgage and not, right? This is a big deal for me. But come on, in the collective, it's 200 to 201. It's just, nobody's going to notice. And of course, the second farmer has pretty much the same rationale, except maybe his wife wants a new purse or something, right? I mean, who knows? But the idea is that each person acting in their own selfish best interest creates to a situation that is absolutely worst for everybody, and inevitably you get an environmental collapse. And this notion of the tragedy of the commons has been shown over and over and over. As there's the top left, the communal grazing land, top right, happened in Newfoundland, where the fishers were supposed to catch, 100 pounds of fish per fisher per day, and they're like, I'll just get 110, it won't make a difference because there's millions of pounds, and take every fisher and add 10 fish or 10 pounds, and it's the same thing even now. We have this with recycling, for example. It's like, it's easier for me to just throw my trash out, and so what happens is, what does it matter? There are 350 million American people. What is my one behavior going to matter? This is what voting is all about. This is voter apathy at its core. And so my vote doesn't matter, and each and every individual is absolutely right. Your one vote doesn't matter, but it's a collective together which creates the collapse and gets that shit we got stuck with in the last election. Sorry. Wanted to tame that a little bit. Okay. So, competition. Competition can be created, a conflict can be created through competition. Absolutely. This is Muzaffar Sharif's, one of his classic, they call it Robber's Cave experiment. And so he set up a summer camp and for boys, like 12-year-old boys or something. And as they're just getting on the bus, they pick them up in the city and they take them out to the country, right? And as they're just getting on the bus, they're like, okay, you're an eagle. Next kid, you're a rattler. So he just totally randomly assigned them the eagles and rattlers. And then they go into these cabins, right? And then he set up all kinds of competitions. And what happened was, at first they liked each other, but after the competition was put into place, they would have archery competitions and baseball and stuff. And it was just crazy how much conflict resulted here. It was amazing. Another thing that can create conflict is a perceived injustice. And this is related, this is this notion of equity theory, that if I feel an equitable relationship exists, and this is not just social psychology, I mean, this is in businesses or something, that is, I must believe that the ratio of my outcomes to my inputs is equal to the ratio of your outcomes to your inputs. In other words, in any social relationship, I have to feel that there's a balance between what I'm putting in and what I'm getting out of it. And so what we find is that this is not just my inputs and my outcomes and your inputs, but my perceptions of. And so, like, narcissistic people will think, narcissistic people that think incredibly highly of themselves. So they believe that their inputs are far larger than somebody else will perceive them to be. And so what's going to happen is if somebody has narcissistic personality disorder, they're going to be entering social relationships and they're going to be thinking, this is an inequitable relationship because I am so awesome. I'm putting much more into this relationship than I'm getting out of it. Meanwhile, the person in the relationship with the narcissistic person is going, this is an inequitable relationship because clearly they're not putting their fair share in. Huh? Misperceptions can really be at the core of most conflicts. Almost all conflicts, like, look, White, I don't know who this guy is, but 10 wars from the last century and found that at least one of these happened every time. There's underestimation of the enemy's strength, overestimation of the leader's power, rationalizing your own motives. These misperceptions are at the core of conflict. So conflict, as I said, is a perceived incompatibility of actions or goals. And so often this misperception arises, and again, I'll bring it full circle back to the beginning of this presentation and say that zero-sum games are not the same as non-zero-sum games. And so if you walk into the situation with a misperception that it is a zero-sum game, inevitably you're going to have social conflict. And then the last one in this presentation for things that can create conflict are mirror image perceptions. Reciprocal views of each other held in conflict. That is, I'm not cheating, they're cheating. Right here in the 2000 U.S. presidential election, Bush versus Gore, they had to do the recount, and each side supporter said, we only want a fair and accurate ballot count. It's the other side that's trying to steal the election. Does that sound anything like the voter fraud versus voter disenfranchisement argument? It should, okay? But in this case, my side's right and their side's wrong. I'll leave it up to you to decide which side is right, okay? So, anyway, we'll come back next time and we'll talk about how we might perhaps not just have conflict, but perhaps how we might be able to make peace.